Namaste. Welcome to Bodhi Television. We present different Buddhist personalities from around the world to talk about different aspects of Buddhism. Today we have Venerable Karma Lekshe Tsomo as our guest. She is a Buddhist nun. She teaches Buddhism in University of San Diego, right? And above all, she is an activist to revive Bhikkhuni Sangha in Theravda sect, which is now non-existing. Let's talk with her about Bhikkhuni, women in Buddhism, and reviving of Theravda Bhikkhuni. Welcome to Bodhi Television. Nice meeting you.
Nice to meet you.
How are you now?
Very well, thank you.
How is it coming into Nepal now? In which occasion?
It's really wonderful to be here. Yes, I came to pay my respect to Venerable Dhammawati at Dhammakirti Vihar, and also to select a Buddha for our new center in Hawaii. So Nepal has the best Buddhas, so I came to Nepal to select a Buddha.
Thank you very much. As a background, can you tell me something about yourself? How you came into Buddhism, how you turned into a nun, we can say, and how your interest in women in Buddhism started?
Well, I was born in the United States, and my family name was Zen. So it sounds like Zen Buddhism. So because I had that name, I started to read about Buddhism, and I just loved it. I loved the philosophy, I loved the meditation. But it was very early, it was many years ago. I was just a little kid. So it took a long time before I could actually get more information about Buddhism. Buddhism is new to the United States, so it wasn't easy in the beginning. Actually, I came to Nepal in 1965 to learn more about Buddhism, but it was also very early here in Nepal. So after many years of studying at the university, then I went to Dharamsala and studied at the Tibetan library. And then gradually I went back to the States. In 1977 I became a nun because I really wanted to dedicate my life to Buddha Dharma. And then in 1989 I got bitten by a snake near Dharamsala. So I went back to the States and sort of accidentally became a professor. So that's my story.
Okay, how was your family's reaction when you told them that you wanted to become a nun? It must be surprising for them. Yes. Probably they didn't accept it. How was it?
Well, when I was a little kid, when I announced to my mother that I was a Buddhist, I was just 11 years old. So they knew that I really liked Buddhism. But my mother is a serious Christian. And so for her, she thought, well, I would burn in hell for eternity if I didn't accept her religion. But and my father is a capitalist, so he also didn't appreciate me becoming a Buddhist nun. But I'm very happy that I found this path, and it's really been a wonderful life.
How do you feel now in this age?
Oh,
is it
so happy? Yes, it's a good life.
Okay, let's talk about something about the history. We are taught that Buddhism gives equal opportunity to both men and women, and somehow we find it not satisfactory. How do you feel it? Is it true?
Well, the Buddha taught a path to liberation for both women and men. So that's clear. And the whole idea is to purify our minds, to transform our minds. So basically there's no difference between the mind of a man and the mind of a woman. It's just consciousness, right? And purification of consciousness, cultivating a good heart. But over time, the same patriarchal traditions seem to have reasserted themselves. Most societies are male-dominated, and so the idea is that basically women have equal potential for liberation. But in actual fact, it's not so easy for women to get education in Buddhism and to get equal opportunities for practice.
Okay, how do you think, what Buddha has opinion about women?
Well, the Buddhist texts give mixed messages,
Yeah.
right? We don't have a historical record of the Buddha's teachings, but we have many books, and they don't all agree. In some of them, the Buddha praises women a lot, and in other cases, there are not so flattering images of women in the texts. So it's sort of a mixed message. But I think we can look at the positive ones and get a lot of encouragement from them.
Okay, that's what I wanted to ask. Somewhere we say it's good to have a daughter, baby, and somewhere it says women is attachment, so stay away from them, kind of thing. In this 21st century, how can we analyze Buddha's opinion about women?
Well, let's remember that the Buddha was talking primarily to a male audience. The largest group of followers at that time were the monks. So when he was talking to monks, he would tell them to be careful that women, are the source of great temptations. But if he had been talking to a group of women, he might have phrased it exactly the opposite. For women, they should be careful around men, right? If they want to stay celibate and live the life of a monk or a nun, then they have to be careful, right? And so I think that just because he said that to men doesn't mean that he was implying that women are lower. For example, in Buddhist societies, we often hear people say that being born as a woman is bad karma. But the Buddha never said that. No. And so sometimes these sorts of misconceptions arise in Buddhist societies, but actually there's no basis in fact. It didn't come from the words of the Buddha.
Okay, coming back to history again, we have a very well recited story about Gautama's renunciation and ordination. How do you call it? It is a challenge or a chance or opening to women's liberation, or tying the knot, or confining the pond, as it is said. How do you feel now?
Well, I think that renunciation of household life allows us to focus full time on practicing the Dhamma. If we're a monk or a nun, then we have 24 hours in the day to study and meditate and serve the society. If we have a family, we have other obligations. We can see that, right? So the Buddha actually recommended the path of renunciation, and he modeled that by himself, giving up a palatial life, a luxurious life, and becoming a monk, right? But in the end, he also taught the middle way. So that's important too. And he didn't say that lay people can't become liberated. In fact, lay people can also practice. So lay women, lay men, we can practice in every action of everyday life, whether we're men or women, old or young.
Okay, the story of Gautami ends in Garudhamma. And how do you analyze it? Why it was important in those days, and is it really important to follow those rules in today's society?
Okay, so the story goes back to Mahapajapati, the Buddha's stepmother and auntie, requesting to join the Sangha. And at first, the Buddha is said to have hesitated 3 times. This is a very controversial point. Why did he hesitate? He must have known that women have equal capabilities, right? Well, there's several reasons that have been given. One is that it would have been just too radical a step to let women leave the household life, leave their husbands, leave their children, and go to sleep under trees and wander in the forest. And the other people may not have accepted Buddhism, may not have accepted his teachings if he allowed women to do so. The second idea is that if there were thousands of young men and young women in the Sangha, then perhaps there would be attractions arising between them. And that could be a problem, right? So he may have hesitated for that reason. Also, remember, he was talking to his stepmother, who was a queen. And for a queen to leave the palace and wander and live on alms and sleep under trees, it's not so easy, right? So maybe he was wondering whether she could really handle it or not. But in the end, he did agree. He had to admit, and he admitted to Ananda, that women do have the potential to become fully realized. That is, the four fruits of the path, including arhat. Women are capable of doing that. So then, according to the text, he imposed 8 special rules on her. And these subordinate the nuns to the monks. In that the nuns have to get ordained by 10 monks as well as 10 nuns. Monks only have to get ordained by 10 monks. But nuns have to get ordained by 10 monks and 10 nuns, right? Makes it about twice as difficult, right? But some of the rules are also to protect the nuns. So not to stay in a place in the rainy season retreat where there is no monk. That could have been for the protection of the nuns. So the latest research shows that probably these 8 Guru Dharmas were not spoken by the Buddha at all. If you check with Pali scholars, you'll find that the language of the 8 Guru Dharmas is very different from the language of the text in which it's found. So it's as if you were reading along in ancient language, and suddenly there's a very modern passage. It clearly doesn't belong there, right? So these rules probably were not spoken by the Buddha. However, because they're in the text, and remember the texts were recited for hundreds of years. These monks had good memories, very good memories, but they were all monks, and they may have had an opinion about the matter. So it's not impossible that, well, we see in the different traditions that the language is a bit different. Basically, they're all the same. But in this case, I think that the Buddha was mostly concerned about the safety of the nuns.
And how today we analyze it? Was it, how do you say, it was good for those days, or it was, do we have to follow those rules today also?
Well, I think that the problem is the rules make it seem as if the women are secondary. And this has given people the idea in Buddhist societies that somehow women are inferior to men. Because in the text, in the 8 Guru Dharmas, it says that the nuns have to bow to the monks. Now, I have no problem bowing to monks. It doesn't cost anything, right? I like to show respect to everyone. And so that's not such a big problem, as long as they're good monks. Now, the Buddha made it very clear, if the monk was not well behaved, the nuns don't have to bow to that monk, right? So he said that. And that's some kind of guideline for us.
No, my question is, in today's context, we can avoid many of those outdated rules, but these 8 rules stand as barrier to many of nuns around the world. When monks have something to tell nuns, they come up with these rules. How can we officially avoid it or negate it or overlook it in today's Sangha?
Well, I'm not sure that we can completely overlook it because it's in the texts. It's sort of like we can't just throw away the sutras. The sutras will stand. We cannot rewrite them at this point. But how we adapt them to modern life is another question. So we can, it depends on the circumstance too. You know, here in Nepal, it's perfectly ordinary for a nun to bow to a monk. But in the United States, it looks very strange. And people don't understand it at all. So now, in most Western countries, we just bow to each other like this. And I've noticed in Korea these days, where the nuns are mostly bhikkhunis, and the monks are also bhikkhus. But when the nuns go to bow to the bhikkhus bow back to them. They respect each other. It's a beautiful thing.
That is beautiful.
Yes.
Okay, again, we read lots of things about Bhikshunis in Buddha's time. Many of them had that Etadaga titles. But after that, we don't have that many of a reference of nuns in Buddha's time also. What do you say?
Well, we have the records of a lot of very special nuns, highly accomplished nuns. And the Buddha himself recognized certain nuns for their special capabilities, their special attainments, either in meditation or in monastic discipline or in renunciation or in teaching. And he praises them by name in the text. So we know that thousands of women became arhats at the time of the Buddha. We have these records, but you're right that after the early days, women sort of drop out of the picture for hundreds of years. We don't have many records of nuns. But then remember, the record keepers were male. So maybe they just didn't pay special attention to the women. But these days we're trying to recover Buddhist women's history. And I think in the last 30 years we've managed to shed light on some very important women in Buddhist history. There have been many wonderful, highly accomplished nuns and lay women.
In history again, we do not read much about Bhikkhunis even at the time of Mahaparinibbana. Is it true?
Well, at the time, you mean the Buddha's parinirvana? Oh yes, there were many stories about women. If you read the text, you'll find, the names of them. Kaya, Kema, and Upalavana,
that I
and
know.
of course Mahapajapati was the leader of the nuns at that time, and she was very special. She was a leader. She was a pioneer. She was a feminist, you could say, because she believed in women having equal opportunities, right? And she led a march of 500 women, to request admission to the Sangha. She was courageous and fearless, and all these palace women, just cut off their hair and put on robes, and they were determined. So I think that we can say that there were a lot of very special women at that time. At the Buddha's parinirvana, there's this one story that they criticized Ananda, who is the friend of women, right? He's the one who helped Mahapajapati to get admission to the Sangha. And they say that some of the nuns came when the Buddha passed away, and some tears fell on his body. And then the other monks were criticizing Ananda. How did you allow this to happen? But, it's kind of a silly thing, isn't it? So, I mean, they were just sad that he passed away.
Okay. Bhikkhuni Sangha was very strong, as you said. But how do you think the whole Sangha disappeared or collapsed after some 100 years? How do you say about it? And when? I want to know in which period of time Bhikkhuni Sangha disappeared in the history of Buddhism, and what could be the prominent reasons?
Okay, well, they say that the Bhikkhuni Sangha died out soon after the Buddha's passing, but actually it's not the case, because we have records. In India, books don't last so long, but they have stone pillars that record the donations of Bhikkhunis up until the 11th century, both in Sri Lanka and in India. So the stone monuments are very long-lasting, and we can see the names of the Bhikkhunis inscribed on these pillars. So this tells us that not only was the Bhikkhuni Sangha in existence, at least until the 11th century, both in India and Sri Lanka, but that the nuns were well supported, because they not only had enough to eat, but they also had surplus income to sponsor these kinds of donations. So this is pretty good evidence, you see. And then, of course, we have the records of Sanghamitra, the daughter of Emperor Ashoka, taking the Bhikkhuni Sangha down to Sri Lanka in the 3rd century BCE. And it flourished there. Again, Queen Anula became a Bhikkhuni and lots of palace women, and it really took off. And it also lasted until the 11th century. Fortunately, in the 5th century CE, Common Era, they also transmitted it to China, which is why we have the Bhikkhuni Sangha in the world today. And so the Sri Lankan nuns were saying, well, we gave them, we gave the Chinese the Bhikkhuni Sangha, now we can just bring it back to Sri Lanka. And they have. So that's a very, very good thing, wonderful thing.
Okay, coming back to nuns again and Theravada. You have been many countries and Theravada countries. How do you see nuns are living? How is their status? They have different names and different status in different Theravada countries.
Okay. Well, in the beginning, when I first came to Nepal and India and Sri Lanka, it was the mid-60s, 1965. At that time, I couldn't find nuns at all. I didn't see nuns wherever I looked. But over the years, things have really changed in a really positive direction. So I think especially because in 1987, we held a conference on Buddhist women, the first international conference on Buddhist women, and at the end of that conference we established Sakyadita. Sakyadita means Daughters of the Buddha, and this organization has worked for the welfare of women since then. Every 2 years we hold an international conference where we get together and talk about these questions. Nuns from Theravada countries, Mahayana countries, everyone can come. Lay people can come, men can come, monks can come, everyone is welcome. Right? So, since 1987, the status of nuns in every country has improved a lot. Now, what I see is that in the Mahayana countries, where like Korea, China, Taiwan, Vietnam, where they have Bhikkhuni ordination, thanks to the Sri Lankan nuns who transmitted it in the 5th century, this lineage then went to Korea and Taiwan and Vietnam. Unfortunately, not to Japan. But they are practicing as bhikkhunis. They get a wonderful education. They're well supported by the community. And then they emerge as teachers and social workers and great practitioners. Now, in the Theravada countries, they don't always enjoy those opportunities. In many Theravada countries, when we started, there were no bhikkhunis in any Theravada country. But things have changed a lot. At that first conference in 1987, there was a group of 16 people from Sri Lanka. When they heard the word bhikkhuni, they thought, oh, we must have a Bhikkhuni Sangha. And they worked over the years to establish the Bhikkhuni Sangha in Sri Lanka. Now today, out of 4,000 nuns, at least half of them are bhikkhunis. And what they did was, in the first group, to take the ordination from Koreans, and then take it again from Theravada monks. So they want to keep their own tradition. They want to be Theravada. They don't want to be Mahayana. But they wanted the bhikkhuni lineage. Now basically the precepts are not very different at all. We've documented this with many studies of Theravada. The precepts themselves are, well, when we say Theravada, it's one of 16 schools of Vinaya. Only 3 exist today. Right? Theravada, Dhammagupta, and Mulasavastavada. So in the Theravada countries, they practice Theravada. In East Asia, they practice the Dhammagupta. In the Tibetan tradition and North Asia, they practice the Mulasavastavada. But when you study the precepts, you can see that there are no major differences among them. And they all originate from the same branch, right? The same root. And then they just branched out. So the nuns, of course, in every society, there are those who want to dedicate themselves to religious practice. We can see that. And so in the Theravada countries, women began to practice as nuns, like nuns, keeping first 5, then maybe 8, maybe 9, maybe 10 precepts. And they live like nuns. In fact, they keep the precepts of a bhikkhuni, even though they're not recognized as a bhikkhuni. They're very strict. The nuns are very strict in their practice. So, and then gradually, now some are going to take the bhikkhuni ordination within Sri Lanka. So you have now 40 monasteries in Thailand that have bhikkhunis who've gone down to Sri Lanka and gotten
Before coming to this, I would like to talk about the period before it was reintroduced. How was it difficult in those countries for women to be ordained?
It was, you could get the precepts. The problem was that you didn't get their support. The nuns weren't getting, when you only have 8 precepts, you don't always get enough to eat. So it was very difficult for them. So young, educated women were not likely to become nuns because, the certain living conditions for nuns were very poor at that time. Now things have improved a lot, and nuns are getting more respect.
Yeah, now it is different. But I heard that in those days, and women were not allowed to even take 10 precepts. They were very badly treated. How was the situation? How could they find their self-respect in that kind of Buddhist society?
Well, I think that the nuns are very sincere and they're very devout Buddhists. So for them to serve the monks is considered a great privilege. Just like the lay women, we can see they love to cook for the monks. So the nuns just sort of naturally, many of them fell into that role of cooking and cleaning for monks. So now we should remember that every country is different. There are many different Theravada countries.
Yeah.
So you have Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Bangladesh, Nepal. We also have Theravada nuns in Vietnam. So all of them are quite different.
Yeah.
In some countries, like in southern China, where they practice Theravada Buddhism, there are no nuns. So in Bengal, for example, in India, there are very, very few. Bangladesh, very, very few nuns because the situation is not easy. But what they used to do is live in the corner of a monk's monastery. And they would do their prayers in the morning and evening, meditation morning and evening. And then during the day, they would cook and clean for the monks. So it wasn't maybe ideal to our modern eyes, but for them it was a great opportunity because at least they got to be nuns, at least they got to practice. And then by serving the monks, they also got enough to eat. But now things are starting to change, and people are starting to respect the nuns for their own practice and to support them. And remember, most of the donors are women. So this isn't necessarily male discrimination. Women also discriminate. They give larger donations, more donations to the monks than they do to the nuns.
That's nice.
So we need to raise the awareness among both women and men.
I heard that in some countries like Thailand, it is they are not allowed to be called nuns at all. How is the situation now?
Well, the word nun is an English word.
Yeah.
So some people think that we should reserve the term nun for a bhikkhuni. But I feel that according to the English definition of a nun, it's a renunciant woman.
Yeah.
Who lives in a monastery. So in fact, the nuns in those countries are nuns, even if they only have 8 or 9 or 10 precepts. And by the way, in Sri Lanka, they do have 10 precepts. That's why they're called Dashashila Mata.
Yes.
They had that from about 100 years now. It started the tradition of Dashashila Mata, and now many of them have become bhikkhunis also. Now, here's something that might interest you. I've noticed in all the different countries, the younger nuns are interested in becoming bhikkhunis, but some of the older ones feel that the ordination procedure process is too difficult for them. But if the younger nuns become bhikkhunis, then in fact they outrank their teachers, and that's an uncomfortable situation. You see, there's a sort of a power imbalance there. Another factor is that many of the nuns are studying with male teachers, and they often get discouraged from becoming bhikkhunis. The monks will say, "Oh, why do you need to be a bhikkhuni? 10 precepts, 8 precepts is enough. If you keep them purely, that's enough for you." But that's a bit patronizing. And also, I mean, if full ordination is good for men, isn't it good for women too?
Yes.
Right? It
Obviously.
should be equally beneficial, equally valuable. So this is sad that some monks, like Venerable Ashvaghos in Nepal, in Sri Lanka, some of the monks told me, if the nuns become bhikkhunis, then we will get less donation.
What a reason.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
But in fact, in Sri Lanka, the opposite has occurred. Now that they have 2,000 or 3,000 bhikkhunis, everybody is getting more because the Dharma is flourishing, you see. So that's sort of limited thinking.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm very pleased to invite you here and have the opportunity to talk about different aspects of Buddhism, especially in the Bhikkhuni movement that's going around the world, and especially it's important in Nepal. Thank you very much. Well, we've just talked with Venerable Karma Lekshe Tsomo. We've just talked about history of women in Buddhism and the state of Bhikkhunism in Buddhist history, and necessary of reviving Bhikkhuni Sangha in Theravda. Thank you for watching Bodhi Television. Namaste.